Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is February. Oh, I forgot to note that in the morning post. First day of February today, February 1, not Groundhog Day. That's tomorrow, unless it's tomorrow again and again. We don't get the chance to make that joke. I learned today is an Irish, Celtic pagan holiday that I have already forgotten the name of because I'm just not up on my pagan lore. But first day of February, an ancient pre-Christian pagan type of spring holiday, first day of spring. I guess they marked it on the calendar. Although where they got the February 1st idea, I don't know, unless it was from the Christian church and their calendar. But I'm sure they had their own calendar. And at the time, and I guess it corresponded to something like February 1st, or it got carried over that way, and I guess it also got shifted over to Saint's Day. I believe it's St. Bridget's Day, a mother saint rather than patron saint. Patron saint, I guess, would be a masculine form, but a mother saint of Ireland, and lots of interesting lore that goes along with it, none of which I am familiar with, but Wikipedia surely will tell you all of those things. I only found out because Jew who knows it all, or Jew who has it all, rather, jumped on this morning to wish everyone a happy, whatever it was that this name of this date was. I can't recall. It begins with an I. Who has any idea whether I'd be pronouncing it right anyway? I'm sure I would ruin it. But, made for some interesting morning reading. And now it can make for interesting morning reading for you, or interesting morning tweeting, texting, tooting, emailing, whatever it is, whether you want to use the KITM hashtag or otherwise to try and reach us and give us a rundown on what the holiday is and what the pronunciation guide is. And I'm always appreciative of things like that. But as it turns out, the show is chiefly about other stuff. News, politics, craziness that goes on in the orbit of news and politics. And that's what we'll be focusing on today. We have a lot to catch up on. There's still a lot waiting in pocket, still on the topics we haven't really thoroughly covered from last week, but I think we're mostly done with the Charles McGonigal backgrounder discussion anyway. And now we just sit and watch with the rest of the country in astonishment as we find out that more or less everything that we should have known a lot earlier to help us make sense of the sabotage and chaos going on during the Trump administration, and indeed in the campaign that led up to what ended up being called the Trump administration, we should have known all of this, and some of it we did know, and some of it we only suspected, and now years later are getting the confirmation that we needed to do what? To confirm our priors. The real interest, of course, is can we convict the people who perpetrated all the priors? And, it's America, and we just typically don't do that. But we'll see whether we catch up on these things or not. Of course, all sorts of other interesting stories being prepared for you as well. Greg's got his regular raft of stories. I've got a few more things to throw in there. Just in passing, I'll tell you the morning discussion around here anyway. Oh, look, the bus app decided to work again today. Not that high schooler is on his way to school because he's home in day 4 or so of isolation from his positive COVID test, as we all got here at KITM headquarters. Anyway, I've been watching reaction over the past couple of days. A lot of people are picking up on this story that down in Florida, where their governor ostensibly said he was going to be cracking heads about voter fraud because it was rampant and it was all over the place, et cetera, and made such a big show of having, press conferences and perp walks and release of photos and everything every time that he found a person of color who had been involved in alleged voter fraud or voted twice or whatever, however you want to label that activity, or was, in many cases, sometimes just registered either in 2 places or registered apparently improperly. Most of the celebrated cases in Florida were people of color who had been convicted of a crime in Florida, had served their time, been released from prison, and had been advised that it was A-OK for them to register to vote and to go ahead and vote. Asked that question specifically at voter registration. Were told, yes, here's the forms, filled them out, and then they used those forms later to track them down and tell them, no, we changed our minds. It's actually against the law, and you're under arrest. Whereas four white Republicans, as it turns out, voted, just simply registered twice, voted twice. And they were residents of the Villages, the big retirement community. It's more than a retirement community. It's kind of, an entire municipality, basically, of several different retirement communities, the Villages, plural. And, guess what? They did, in fact, get convictions. In fact, they got guilty pleas in 4 cases. And I believe the 4th one is what has triggered the latest round of discussion online. Just saying, oh golly, it's how interesting that there's no big fanfare for this. Every time they actually arrest a white Republican and they confess to the voter fraud, somehow it doesn't seem to make as big a dent with the press and certainly not with the governor there. As it turns out, as I was reading through the story of their 4th such conviction right there in the Villages, and there were more suspected to be following up. It turns out that there is somebody, and I don't know what their bent is, but an activist of some sort down in Florida who apparently has been sifting through the data set, identifying other voters that he believes are either double registered or who cast more than one ballot. Doesn't always pan out, as it turns out, and that's the case with most such activity, right? There's lots of suspicion and very little that's actually provable necessarily. But it turns out that this person who has been tipping off the Florida law enforcement community gave the tips that led to these 4 convictions in the Villages and says they've got 200 plus, almost 300 similar cases in the backlog that they've similarly reported to law enforcement authority. But curiously, the law enforcement community unwilling to move forward with this first top highest priority for America and Florida. My guess is that they're arresting the wrong kind of people. As you know, the Republican mantra these days is what we're in business for. Why are we in government? Why are we involved in politics? And the answer is to hurt the right people and make sure that the wrong people don't get hurt. In other words, us. We get away with whatever we want to do, and we use the power of the government, weaponize it, some might say, and direct it against the wrong people, the ones we don't like. And maybe that's what's going on. Anyway, it's a fascinating story. We'll give some time over to it if we can, but who knows whether we'll be able to, because there's so much to get to, so much, in fact, that Greg Dworkin just can't wait to get started, although you're waiting very patiently. I'm sorry, I'll get out of your way now,
Well,
Greg.
apparently I can wait.
Yeah, I know. It's all a big lie.
I can demonstrably wait.
If I just say it
the
enough.
time between when I dinged in and when I'm actually talking.
Yes, but as you know, facts don't matter, and
But, if it's
data
not
means
measurable, it
nothing,
didn't
and
happen.
YOLO, LOL. I said you couldn't wait, and therefore that's the fact. So anyway,
Right.
I'm wrong. Good morning. Thank you for waiting.
Good morning and welcome to Fox News. So,
Okay.
where things are what we tell you they are.
Yes, exactly.
The
What are we telling them?
interesting thing about the Charles McGonigal story, and it's not about, more background about what happened, 2 aspects of it that occurred to me. One, Will Bunch covered. He
Yes.
had a column, I don't know if you covered it. The New York Times should tell readers whether it helped
I did.
crooked FBI agents get Trump elected in 2016. The arrest of a high-level FBI agent on Russia-tied corruption charges raises stunning new questions about how Trump really won in 2016.
It does.
Just a reminder that the New York Times has never apologized for screwing it up.
Right. I did. Your mention of it on Monday, I put it on the list, and we read it yesterday at last.
Yeah. But the other thing that occurs to me in looking at that story is that this is a real issue with real implications. Instead,
no
NBC
wonder.
Nightly News is continuing to flog the Joe Biden documents leave unanswered questions, and as Kristen Welker loves to put it when it comes to Democrats, leaves a cloud over what's really happening because there's no transparency.
Yeah,
Which
that's
is
what clouds do.
which is newspeak for you didn't confer with us before doing anything. Like you went ahead and you talked to the DOJ really early on and did everything right, but you didn't tell us, the media. Therefore, you're hiding something.
Yes. We're hiding the clouds.
What?
I'm not sure
what are you
what.
hiding?
I'll
you're
get
not
back
telling
to you
us
on
what's
that.
in the document. They're secret.
Right. Well,
You can't. You don't know what's in them.
Yes.
Well, but maybe there's nothing. Maybe there's something. How do we know unless you let us see? You can't
Yeah.
see them. And
Nothing
maybe they
better.
are nothing. And it's a nothing story. And you're covering that way more than you're covering this Charles McGonigal thing.
yeah, it is interesting, that formula of like, well, when you come across something that is actually meant to be secret, and then they just play the "what are you hiding" card. Like, did you know that across this country, millions and millions, hundreds of millions of ballots are cast in total secrecy?
Yes. Who did you vote for, really?
Yeah, we need to find
And
out.
why won't you tell us? It's been 100 days since you didn't tell us about who you really voted for.
Transparency now.
Yes, exactly. So, it's just really frustrating to hear them because it's stupid. And, they think you're stupid. And they think that, if they cover it this way, you're not going to notice. And, that all got me riled because I was looking at the New York Times economics coverage.
Well, I'm sorry.
Which is always terrible.
Well, what are you doing?
It's just, it's amazing how terrible it is. It's not that it's factually wrong, but there is no such thing as presenting the news neutrally.
Yeah, at this point, come on.
Right? I mean, inflation is down, but it might come back. Well, yes. Why did you write it that way?
That's a good question.
Why do you always write it this way?
Yeah.
Here's the headline for today's story on what's going on in Europe. Eurozone inflation eased swiftly and sharply last month as skyrocketing energy costs decline. You'd think that was good news, right? Till you read the subheader.
Oh.
Prices rose at an annual rate of 8.5% last month. Signs of persistent cost increases remain. That's true. It's all factual. But what are you trying to tell people? And you go and you read the article and you realize what it really is a justification for more rate hikes.
Oh, well, that does make a certain amount of sense.
Prices are,
terms of,
it's really remarkable how
happening.
much inflation has eased. But since things are more expensive than they were 25 years ago, we better hike prices.
Well, it's not like that would go unread if that were the headline. Utility companies raise rates inexplicably. I'll read that.
Right? So the report was the latest signal that inflation in Europe is starting to cool meaningfully, and it buttressed expectations the European economy might be able to avoid a deep and painful recession. Stock market is expected to do well. Overall inflation peaked late last year and will continue to ease throughout 2023. Oxford Economics, a London think tank, said of the report. And efforts by European governments will aid in disinflation as well. That's all good news, right?
I mean, sounds right.
But there's always a but. But Wednesday's data showed core inflation held steady, and it's a signal that price rises are becoming embedded. In other words, things are more expensive than they used to be. Hello. Welcome to life.
Well, right.
And so, therefore, you have to raise an interest rate and put people out of work because, they don't explain why. That's the part. They never explain why.
Why is it great for people to be out of work? Yeah, that's always that's a fun thing that the Fed likes to do.
It's not that anything they said was wrong. It's like, why did you put it together that way? It's a complete justification for we have to raise rates because, it's eventually going to help the people who own the businesses.
I guess so. And I mean, the only
thing I
can
want to say
think
that
of
directly because it sounds like I'm on the side of the people who own the businesses and against labor. I don't want to say that. So I'll just tell you, it's one of those things you have to do and everybody knows it.
Yeah, I think it feels like the New York Times sort of catering to its readership kind of thing. Like, well, and basically this is, well, here at the New York Times, our readers know that the only real response to something like this is to put the readers of the New York Daily News out of work.
Exactly.
Okay.
Not the Daily News, the readers of the Daily News.
Right. Daily News gets to stay in business because the people who run the Daily News read the New York Times.
That's exactly right. And, that's why it's so frustrating to read that stuff.
Interesting.
So let's talk about some legal stuff since we brought up the FBI probe.
Okay.
Here's a different one I didn't even know about until I read a couple of stories about it. Politico, secret hold restricts the Department of Justice's bid to access the phone of Trump ally Representative Scott Perry. Did you know about this one?
I saw the headline on it, and I was like, secret hold. Wait a minute. I'm not used to talking about
this was happening, but the Department of Justice had been trying to get a hold of Scott Perry's phone to see what was on it. That we knew.
That was not a secret.
Is that they were granted that access.
Okay.
Beryl Howell in December said, yeah, you can go ahead and look at it.
Right.
But the House of Representatives protested secretly. And a secret group, which includes Hakeem Jeffries and Kevin McCarthy, are now involved. And the chamber moved to intervene in the back and forth over letting DOJ access the phone of Perry, the House Freedom Caucus chair, reflecting the case's potential to result in precedent-setting rulings about the extent to which lawmakers can be shielded from scrutiny in criminal investigations.
Okay.
And so the House is coming on the side of, you can't look at us because we're the House.
Yes, that's
and the people's
a thing
house,
you can try.
People's chamber. The people say, yeah, you're a bunch of crooks. Go ahead and look.
Right. Yeah. Isn't that interesting? We, as the representatives closest to the people, we say that the people are not interested in whether or not we're criminals. Sure. Well, I don't know where the secret part came from, but
well, the fact that it was put on hold was not done until 2 days ago.
And that was another thing. I didn't know whether there was a hold.
The case, and he can go ahead and look. No,
right.
He can't.
Now, I mean, the weird thing about this was, it struck me as if they had told me, well, Perry's appealing the ruling, or even that the House of Representatives is appealing the ruling, I would say, okay, I understand that. Where's this terminology of the hold coming from? I don't know, but I'll have to read it and see if I can dissect it. Or are they just saying that he's appealing, and so there's a stay pending appeal?
Yeah.
Okay.
The FBI agent seized Perry's phone with a court-approved warrant in August, but still lacked necessary second level of judicial permission to begin combing through the records. Perry's claimed communications are barred from outside review because he's a member of Congress.
Right. I mean, there is a certain amount of immunity.
The Department of Justice went to court, and Beryl Howell said, yeah, you can look. And then they went to the feds, and the feds said, no, you can't.
That is unusual. I mean, Beryl Howell is a fed.
Yeah, so the appeal court said you can't.
Yeah. All right. Well, so I guess that would be the D.C. appeals court.
On January 5th, according to the docket, a 3-judge appeals court panel put a temporary hold on Howell's ruling.
Okay, there we go.
The appeals panel assigned to the case, which include Trump appointees Nemo Rao and Gregory Katsas, as well as Karen Henderson, who was appointed by H.W. Bush, rejected prosecutors' immediate attempt to access Perry's records. There's additional legal briefings scheduled for February 23rd, oral arguments.
All right. Well, that's sensible in terms of,
it's okay to be part of an insurrection, but you get to hide behind that because you're a member of Congress.
Yeah. I mean,
and maybe not, but
not in the end,
may take like a year and a half before that's settled.
Well,
it's interesting because it's like new law here. It's new territory. We're not expecting congressional representatives to be insurrectionists. And what if they are?
In that sense, yes. Right. Well, and it's weird too, because we've had them be insurrectionists before. We fought a war and it was well known, but they did eventually make way for most of them to come back too. And eventually
now, the other thing, and what made it so secret and what's so interesting about it, is that under what circumstances are the DOJ looking to get access to this phone? And the answer to that is it's part of a grand jury investigation.
There's some secrecy there.
So, so that's why it's not being, why didn't you tell NBC News about this?
I see. Okay,
You're not being transparent about it. It's a grand jury. It's supposed to be secret.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be some secrecy involved there. It was just an odd formulation of it. Secret hold restricts DOJ's bid. It's an appeal.
Yeah, and then they go on to say several other secret grand jury battles have lined the appeals court docket in recent months. In September, Howell supported Department of Justice effort to pierce executive privilege claims related to testimony from aides of Vice President Mike Pence. And reports suggest Howell issued a similar ruling late last year related to former White House attorneys. Okay. So, part of the frustration from the public is that these guys are getting away with everything, and Merrick Garland doesn't do anything. Actually, there's a whole lot of stuff happening behind the scenes here. It's just you don't know about it because, like, it's secret.
Yeah, or sometimes it gets held up in the process. But I mean, in order for it to be in the process, that means Merrick Garland is doing things, trying to move them along.
Yes.
So there is that.
It's moving with the speed of DOJ. It's moving with the speed of rule of law. Which is to say, really slowly.
Right.
But nonetheless, it's moving.
Yes. Right. Slow, frustrating. And I'd be curious. Yeah, this is it's a good analog going on here with the mention that you made of Beryl Howell having issued rulings, as they said in the article, I think, piercing the executive privilege claims of people in the White House. Similarly, there are constitutional claims, they're legit, that members of Congress are supposed to be privileged from arrest and therefore prosecution for certain activities that are covered by their essential, freedom of speech as members of Congress. And
that's what Lindsey Graham said. It didn't work in Georgia.
Right. But on a case by case basis, judges are able to say, that doesn't really work here. And it's a similar, like a crime fraud exception to various other privileges, whether it's attorney-client privilege or executive privilege.
In fact, one of the articles I read about that, I think in the Washington Post, mentioned that and said, and yet it's not even, fraud excuse here. It's not the crime exception.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
It's not even that, and yet he's claiming that he gets away with it.
Yeah. Huh. All right. Well, he's, I guess, just relying on the general prohibition against arresting and prosecuting members of Congress in the speech and debate clause protections, even though, this certainly wasn't debate in the House. And, speech and debate about whether or not we should overthrow the government isn't exactly, high on the list of things we ought to be protecting.
And the Washington Post version of it says the implications of this involve not only Perry, but also Jim Jordan and Andy Biggs.
Yes, I would imagine so. Whose phones they don't yet have.
There's a lot going on here, and they may be willing to throw Perry under the bus, but not Jordan, Biggs, and like a bunch of other people too.
Right, and
in fact, how many people will they allow to be thrown under the bus? 3.
Yeah, that's probably right. Whatever number, it depends on who's sick
today. Whatever number
today.
it takes to keep Kevin McCarthy Speaker, that's how we know.
Yeah, I guess that's probably true. And it would be awfully embarrassing for them, although they have a way of fixing it, if their new chairs of the investigative committees that they're establishing were, in fact, themselves under investigation for insurrection. But that, of course, is what they call weaponization of the government. You're using the government to catch criminals, but the criminals are us.
Yes,
therefore,
exactly.
that's weaponization.
So you're weaponizing it. And a tangentially related point here is how come I didn't say 4? Why did I say 3?
Yeah.
Because Kevin McCarthy's already thrown George Santos under the bus. He's taking him off committees.
Yeah.
Why is he taking him off committees? There can be only one answer to why he's taking him off committees.
Oh.
McCarthy's worried about stuff that hasn't even come out yet.
That certainly could be. Joan mentioned that yesterday, that it also it might be part of a move to shore up the votes of a few wavering Republicans on the question they'll have to face eventually on whether or not Republicans can, as revenge, throw Ilhan Omar off of the Foreign Relations Committee because, as you know, she's foreign and weird and therefore has to be punished in retribution for punishing murdery Trader Green and Paul Gosar last Congress because they wouldn't stop talking about murdering their colleagues.
I mean, how can you punish Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell,
right,
white males, and not punish her?
Right. So they got to get around to her. But in order to do that, there are a few Republicans who say, back at home, there are a couple of people who say, how come you're not also punishing George Santos? So let's also punish George Santos. All right. Most of them don't care. Sure. Let's do that. That'll make us feel better about punishing Omar.
Right. So back to the Washington Post piece to finish up what some of the issues are here, because they're fascinating and they are important. And I don't mind that they take their time to try to figure this out. Legal analysts said the fight likely bears not only on what information is covered by congressional immunity, but who gets to decide and how. For example, Perry's communications about efforts by states to draft substitute presidential electors who appoint Clark as attorney general might not qualify as legislative work. But conversations about a potential vote by the House on whether electors were qualified That might be legislative work.
How
do you figure out which one you're allowed to see and which one you're not?
That's true, and it's an open question. Is that really legislative work? They're the legislature and they're doing it, but it isn't.
What if we decide to vote to overthrow
laws.
the government? Does that make it legitimate?
Yeah, I guess you have that option, and I mean, I guess there's really nothing illegal per se about submitting a bill that says we should become a communist country or something like that.
All right. And since we only have like a few minutes left before the break, I just had to throw this one in because it's us.
All right.
All right. This is from the New York Times. Schoolhouse Rock is 50 years old.
Happy birthday, Schoolhouse Rock. Let's count
the educational
to 50.
Snippets are the ultimate font of Gen X nostalgia, but what is it we're nostalgic for?
What are we?
And then they have that famous picture of the Bill just sort of lounging on the steps of the Capitol.
Yeah, he's not.
I'm just a Bill.
Right. But he does have
anybody who
legislative
just
immunity.
even sees the picture that's I'm just a Bill.
I know what's going on there. He's having a hard time getting through committee, but eventually the congressman who does his own typing is going to be able to make this work.
Right.
All right, that's true. Now we feel old.
So this is I can't pronounce his name. I do apologize. He's a conservative policy wonk, but not a nutcase. His name is James Ponywozik.
Oh, okay. Like Ponywozik.
Yeah,
okay. I know the guy you're talking about.
When I was in second grade, my teacher had a contest for students to memorize multiplication tables, gets dinner at McDonald's. I was one of them. I won because Schoolhouse Rock.
All right.
I learned it there.
And good advertisement for McDonald's as well. Okay.
The magic number.
Which times table did he do? You're right. That's true. He was good at math, too, and all sorts of interesting subjects elsewhere. So, yeah, and you all know that a noun is a person, place, or thing, of course. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue. Greg Dworkin still with us, still rounding up stories, still have more things we haven't talked about. What are they again?
Things. There's always things.
Right. Oh, we left off on Schoolhouse Rock. Right, everybody. So congratulations to Schoolhouse Rock for making it to 50. I hope those things are still on the air. And there are generations who can recite the preamble to the Constitution only because they know it by song, and not everybody can simply recite it. They sometimes have to sing it in their head before they spit it out.
Now, speaking of news you can use, it's important to note that those two missing monkeys from the Dallas Zoo have been found.
I did not know about them. All right. Well, good. Where are their cell phones? Can we look at them?
Two monkeys were taken from the Dallas Zoo. Forcefully taken. They were noted to be missing, and then they realized that somebody had broken in. People keep breaking into the Dallas Zoo and taking stuff.
Do they?
Yeah.
That's a thing?
Yeah.
Huh.
So these monkeys, and there's a picture.
Try taking a lion.
They're famous because they have this funny mustache.
Oh, the The people
right
who
above
take
the
things?
Schoolhouse Rock post there, you can see
right.
the funny
The
mustache.
monkey mustache.
Funky monkey mustache there. But they were found in an abandoned house in a closet.
Oh.
Unlikely that they found their way there by themselves.
No.
So they were removed from the Dallas Zoo and then dropped there. And there's a person of interest they're trying to figure out how they're connected.
It's if anything like the movies, he's in the hospital with a crazy disease. So that is a weird looking mustache.
Right. You mean he got from the monkeys and now starting a plague?
Right. Another one. We have another one.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
All right. Well, congratulations to the monkeys, I guess.
Right.
I thought it was like a breakout.
I don't know if you know this, but Liz Truss lost an election because she won an election of only conservatives, only Tories.
Right.
And then she lasted for less than a head of lettuce because she wilted, and the Tories said, people hate what you're doing. They hate what you're doing. The markets hate what you're doing. You're tanking all of the UK, and they hate you, and we hate you, and you have to go, and we're not even going to let you get unelected. We're going to throw you out before the election. And so she left. So I just want to point out that she left under, as Kristen Welker might put it, a cloud.
Yes, a lack of transparency, really.
And a lack of transparency. So what happens, she comes to the United States. That's where she is now. And
like
Alexander Burns, he used to work for the New York Times and now heads the magazine section of Politico and gets to write on foreign stuff. Associate editor for global politics, they call him.
All right.
And that's interesting because, I do think that there's a relationship between what happens here, what happens in Israel, what happens in Hungary. You can see the Hungary model being enacted in Florida. What happens in the UK. Liz Truss crashes the Republican party. The former British Prime Minister, banished from office after a disastrous rollout of her tax cut plan, finds new allies in American conservatives. The very same ones who were pushing a fair tax that everybody hates and now they're running away from. But they have Liz Truss here not because they want to get advice from Liz Truss. No, Liz Truss wants to get advice from them. She came here so she could learn how the Republican Study Committee got itself a majority in the House, and she wants to recreate that sort of caucus back at Westminster. And so she has. And so now there is a small group called the Conservative Growth Group, which, as somebody pointed out on Twitter, sounds like a metastasizing problem here.
It does. Certainly
there's
something.
a growth in the Westminster in the House of Parliament, and Liz Truss is responsible for it. Right. She's not popular. She's not popular here. She's not popular there. I don't understand.
But
I do see that Politico has this lovely little 2-minute video, which is entitled "How Did Lettuce Outlast Liz Truss?" We try to explain in 2 minutes. I think that's. Without even watching it, it's just a marvelous headline.
Yes, right. Well, if it can hook you in for 2 minutes, they're the big winners in the content wars.
Right. Exactly.
So, all right. So she's come to find out how conservatives in the United States have cobbled things together. Can they gerrymander the same way in the UK? I don't know. I guess so.
I don't know. Why not? Truss's Washington tour came in a moment of trial for conservative movements on both sides of the Atlantic. In Britain and the U.S., small government ideology is facing a renewed test of relevance in an age of populism and interventionist economic policy. That's why, the charge that Alexander Burns has been given to write about global politics is so interesting because they are all related. The austerity-minded conservatism, he writes, of the Great Recession gave way years ago in both countries to the spirit of culture war and nostalgic nationalism.
Okay.
Leaving lawmakers who truly want to roll back government marginalized even within right-leaning parties. So the Republicans here and the Tories there will have a lot of trouble saying, well, what we really need is austerity. Austerity doesn't work. And all it does is screw the very people who you need to vote for you as a populist.
Yeah.
So not going to happen.
I guess that's why she came to the United States. It's a fairly obvious lesson. If you're in the UK, I mean, the lessons of austerity as a response are, you originated it. That's your stuff, your idea. It's the Thatcherist idea, and everybody hates that. So I guess she went looking for one that was fresher and supposedly more popular. But I thought you were supposed to go to Florida or hang around Mar-a-Lago. That was the thing to do when you're the deposed would-be dictator or something. She should be with Bolsonaro.
Right. So the way Alexander Perns put it, and I always liked him, even when he was at the New York Times.
Oh, well.
If Truss has lately taken inspiration from the Republican Party in a narrow tactical way, American conservatives might draw some bigger lessons from her tribulations. Here, Republicans are contemplating their own adventure in economic re-engineering, having abandoned fiscal restraint during the Trump years. They're now demanding spending reductions from President Biden in a fight over raising the statutory limit on government borrowing. If Democrats don't agree to some form of cuts, Republicans have threatened to risk a calamitous national default by refusing to raise the debt ceiling. And there's not much evidence that Republicans have a strategy for prevailing or for avoiding the kind of market panic that broke Truss's government. Republicans did not campaign in the midterm on a defined blueprint for downsizing government, and like Truss, they're pursuing structural changes to their country's finances without an electoral mandate.
Yeah,
now, unlike Truss, Republicans still have time to adjust course, but they won't.
This
They won't.
Interaction should be in reverse. I mean, the Republicans should have brought Liz Truss in to ask her, so how can we avoid something dumb like you did with our economy?
And Truss says, well, you really need Brexit.
Yeah, right. And it's essentially what they're saying.
And the conservatives here say, oh, yeah, that's right. That's what we need to do. We need to completely break with Europe.
Right. Or break with whatever it is we're doing. Break with our tradition of honoring our debt and paying our borrowers. But okay, or our lenders, I suppose. We're the borrowers. All right, whatever. You know, I guess she's just looking for a vacation in the U.S. Why now?
Well, yeah, she came to see Grover Norquist,
I guess so.
For example.
All right.
And Norquist said, what you do is you pick one issue. You do one issue. You do Jack Kemp. We're the lower rate people. In Britain's immediate political environment, that's not obviously good advice.
Oh.
Rishi Sunak has dismissed a fresh push for tax cuts as impracticable. His government is beset by labor strife, crisis in healthcare and the cost of living, mounting ethics scandals, and apocalyptic polling brought on in part by Truss herself. I sent you that polling. It's interesting because labor is skyrocketing. Labor's in red. Conservatives in blue have plummeted and are staying at the lowest levels. And so as one wag put it, oh, here's the red wave Republicans were looking at, except wrong country.
Yeah. I wonder if that had anything to do with it. Look at this chart here. Look at the red wave that's going on. We should invite her over and ask her but she really wants to come over and find out how do I reverse the wave that we're actually having.
Right. A read my lips anti-tax message doesn't look like much of a route to relevance for a former prime minister now returned to the backbenches. Actually,
so she should be at work.
If you read that sentence properly,
yeah.
A read my lips anti-tax message does look like a route. It's not a route.
I see.
Definitely a route.
All right. Yeah, I guess that's true. Well, and that's a good point too. That it was reminded that she's not just bounced out of government. She's back. She's still in Parliament. She's just not the prime minister.
Yeah.
So she's a backbencher, looking to become a frontbencher. I guess once again, another star turn for her based on. She's come to the United States to talk to the geniuses of the Republican Party. How come you're so fantastic at figuring out what America really needs? Well, they're not, but, you know, she's not going to ask anybody else, I guess. This is part of this internationalist movement that, as you point out, Alex Burns is pointing out, that, well, they're idiots top to bottom, no matter what country. It's a really, truly internationalist movement, again, to own the globalists, by the way.
Right. Now,
all right.
It used to be that the most influential group in the Republican House was the Republican Study Committee.
Yes.
Now it's the House Freedom Caucus.
Right.
But
that's true.
It still has some juice, and the head of it is a fellow who you may not have heard of. I certainly haven't. You know Congress better than I do, but I never heard of him. His name is Representative Kevin Hern of Oklahoma. And he met with Truss. He's a big fan of Truss. And it's kind of interesting. He said, this Truss is great. Of course, I think, there's a quote, I think she felt like she tried to do too much too soon and didn't have a following.
Yeah.
And he credited her with trying to save Great Britain, although her attempt misfired.
Sure, why not?
And then later on in the article, he talks about the UK as a once great country. And I don't know why you want to emulate and admire somebody who brought them to that place.
Yeah, you wouldn't. But I don't know. I don't know who's trying to emulate who even, really, in this stupid scenario. But I don't know. Liz Truss needed a trip to the U.S. She should have waited for the better weather or have gone to Florida or something. But
right.
I don't know.
So as Alexander Burns points out in this piece, what the Republican Party has not done any better than its British counterpart is persuading voters to give up cherished federal spending in order to balance the public ledger while holding down taxes. The one neat trick in modern American conservatism has been campaigning on tax cuts while embracing deficits and debt that would be intolerable for any other country, and certainly for the UK.
Yes.
So this weapon in the Republican arsenal can't be simply leased to besiege British conservatives. The way they do it here is they say, don't worry,
what?
These cuts will pay for themselves, without explaining how. Because trickle-down economics and the Laffer curve and something on a napkin and Ronald Reagan and yada, yada, and we don't, wave our hands and, you didn't say anything. You just did this with your hands.
Well, that's the lesson.
It'll work out.
Maybe then, she intends
when
to
it
do
doesn't
that.
work out and then we get power again, we'll threaten the closing down the country until you pretend that it wasn't our fault.
Yeah. I mean, that's the actual formula.
The whole discussion here is that there's article after article saying that today Kevin McCarthy is meeting with Joe Biden about the debt issue, and he doesn't have a specific ask because he doesn't really have anything specific he's trying to do.
Yeah.
He just wants chaos.
I want a meeting.
I mean, so what is it you want to cut? Well, we're not specific about it. Well, how are we going to cut if you're not specific about it? This is legislative stuff. You got to be detailed here. This is detail-oriented question.
Yeah, we don't know.
Well, we don't do that. We're Republicans.
Cut weaponization of government and CRT, is, I guess, what they will end up saying. Oh, it isn't happening. Well, we think that, I don't know, Social Security is all that stuff. So I guess they must want to cut that. I don't know. I really don't know what Liz Truss thinks she's going to gain from it, and I would not be surprised if she just goes away. What else? What other lesson is there for her to take away?
It's pretty clear what she wanted. She comes here and she says, I don't understand. How do you get away with this crap here?
Oh, well, yeah.
Teach me.
I guess that's all she's asking.
That's what she's asking.
It's interesting because I don't know if they know.
They don't know.
No one's arrested me.
Something about a candidate and a box. I don't know. Just something.
Yeah. I mean, the irony is, what? The answer is in Schoolhouse Rock, I guess, is we have a written constitution that says we can get away with this kind of crap. I don't know why we gave ourselves the right to do that. I forgot that we did. I only learned about it when my lawyer told me. I think we can stop get a secret hold on that search of your phone if we say something about you're having privileges and immunities. Okay, great. Let's try that and go back to the UK with that and find out that, that's actually an American invention that they came up with because they were sick of us, of the Crown catching criminals here in the UK and punishing them. And they didn't want to be caught over in America. So they gave themselves a constitution that says we can't catch them. We didn't do that. You're caught.
So this piece is from Politico. House GOP sets its expectations low for McCarthy-Biden debt meeting.
Well, that's wise.
Well, yeah. I mean, don't ever expect anything of Kevin McCarthy.
Yeah. All right.
My
he didn't even know what he's
expectations for him are always low. In fact, they start off the article by saying they're so low that many of them point to a single goal for the president to suggest he'll negotiate it all.
Yeah. Which
lower the bar so much you can claim Kevin McCarthy's an effective leader.
Yeah, I guess so. He said he wasn't going to negotiate, but he allowed me in the White House and we talked. So therefore, that's negotiation. So at least we're getting a start. I guess he can claim there were negotiations no matter what.
Right. So House Republicans will hold a debt limit meeting Wednesday morning ahead of their speaker's time with Biden, but the GOP is also entertaining hope if the president shows a shred of openness to taking its demand seriously, even as very few of its members specify what they want Biden to negotiate on.
Yeah.
Now, remember,
I don't know what
I had flagged this guy as somebody to watch. A rare Republican with a concrete proposal was Texas Republican Chip Roy, who on Tuesday
He's
called
an
directive
oddball.
for federal spending caps.
I mean,
So work to it, said Roy.
yeah. He came up yesterday. He is on the House Rules Committee now, Chip Roy. So, there's a real possibility that he can engineer or have a hand in engineering the direction that whatever Republican package makes it to the floor.
Right, or to put it
like.
another way, if the Senate wants to negotiate with the House, this is cinema talking to Chip Roy, because, who else are you going to talk to?
I don't know. Yeah, I guess. Well, Chip Roy is a bit of a wild card. It's hard to tell where he comes down on some things. It'll be interesting to see. Weird. And I don't know
So
what
McCarthy
McCarthy's
says,
going to get.
I think the first thing Biden should do is announce that he's willing to sit down with us.
Well, you're going
Biden,
there.
on the other hand, has said, I don't negotiate with terrorists.
Yeah. So now it'll be a fight over whether or not they actually sat.
Right. House Freedom Caucus
It's a
Chair
chair.
Republican
Yeah,
Scott Perry put it more simply, it would be awesome if the president would admit he's going to negotiate. That would be awesome. And Biden said, you know what would be awesome? Give us your phone.
Yeah, right. Here's Scott Perry, by the way. And does it say anywhere in this story? We asked Scott Perry for his comment on it, but he's actually, about this close to being arrested.
No, didn't say that at all.
No? All right. Well, he might not be that close, but, weird. Okay. We'll see what happens. And the press will probably cover it on the level of, there were chairs there. So they sat down, which means McCarthy's right. He won. Biden's a loser. We got to search his laptop, something, because he said he wasn't going to negotiate. But there's a chair right here. Biden should bring him the monkeys from the zoo. He should present
now
it to
here's
him
an interesting
as a photo
paragraph in the article if you want to take an approach. Unlike some House Republicans, Senate Majority Whip John Thune said he hopes Biden will entertain changes to ensure the long-term solvency of programs like Social Security and Medicare, which are both headed for bankruptcy. It doesn't mean you have to cut programs. It does mean you got to make reforms.
No, it doesn't, but okay.
Fine, but that's okay. You can do that. Raise the cap at which you get to charge, Medicare rates, for example.
I guess.
On your
that's a
income
reform.
tax.
I mean, expanding it is a reform.
Yeah, that's a reform. I mean,
Sure.
You could say, okay, I'm totally into what the Republicans are saying here. I agree. We should work with people like John Thune. I'm not totally intransigent. I like to negotiate. I love negotiating. Let's negotiate with fixing Social Security and Medicare and expanding Medicaid.
Yeah. I mean, why not?
Why not? I mean, I'm totally reasonable. You're the guys who aren't.
That's true. I do really think that they should invite those monkeys. I mean, they're
now
at
that
least
they've
as
been
popular as-
found.
Right. I mean, they weren't gonna invite them but now they know where they are.
Right.
Huh.
Parallel article in terms of how Republicans are doing. This
Invite
one is
Liz Truss.
in Politico about Arizona. Arizona Republicans fear they may blow it again.
Well,
Sinema's party switch has opened the door. The fear is their candidate may walk into the frame of the door. Arizona Republicans Carrie Lake, Blake Masters raised their arms during a campaign rally. Republican Blake Masters
What are
is
they
setting
gonna do?
himself up for another potential run.
that's
And
okay.
Carrie Lake
Setting
is
themselves up,
also
that's funny.
considered. They may run against each other.
Fight. All right.
Of course,
we'll get
she
to
has
find
to
out which
deal
one
with
was
her legal
ultra
challenges, alleging false claims that her 2022 election was stolen. Again, I don't understand why the current sitting governor wants to run for Senate, but she's never explained that.
Does she? Has she said that?
What?
The current governor of Arizona?
Well, she says she's the current sitting governor.
Oh, well, there is that. Oh, she says she's the current sitting governor. Okay. I was like, oh no, the real governor wants to run for Senate. What are you doing? You just 2 seconds ago became governor. It's the fake
That's her.
one.
It's Carrie
Yeah,
Lake. Ask
Carrie
her.
Lake.
She'll tell you. She's the
won.
real
Yeah.
governor.
Well,
But
she likes
I'm
to
also
collect.
considering a Senate campaign.
Sure, and
And
presidential.
I'm also running for George Santos' seat.
Why not? She's the new Harold Ford, I guess, right? She's going to helicopter into everything. Well, all right. I guess as long as you think you can do whatever you want, why not why not run for all three branches? Be on the Supreme Court at the same time.
Democratic Representative Ruben Gallego already in the race. Republicans see a prime opportunity to win the election with a plurality of the vote. But now there are new fears. They'd fumble the opportunity by putting forth a candidate who remains aligned with Trump or fixated on election denialism. So too bad for them.
Yes. Well, all right. Yeah.
What they should do is they should get Liz Truss to advise them on how they should proceed.
Right. Or, again, the monkeys. This
Well, you get better advice
should
from
really be in part of every story. Arizona continues to be a total madhouse. And Kari Lake, more so than any other, most of the other Republicans, even though they never conceded their races, they did eventually, with the exception of Donald Trump himself, stop, campaigning and walking around saying, I'm the governor. But Kari Lake is totally dedicated to this act and continues to have rallies and continue to say that you should be recognizing me as the governor of this state. It's very bizarre, and she is beginning to. It looks like she may land herself in some actual legal trouble over it. But I don't know. We'll have to. You'd have to spend a week unraveling Arizona at this point.
Yep.
Wow. All right. Well,
now we have in the big picture, step back at the 40,000-foot view. This is The Atlantic by McKay Coppins. Looking at Republicans' 2024 magical thinking, lots of Republicans want Donald Trump to disappear from politics. Their main strategy is hope. It's really interesting. If it's too long and you don't have time to read it or it's behind a paywall, basically, since the Republicans can't figure out what to do with him, they just hope he dies.
Yeah, well,
I'm
with you on that.
Mark Leibovich quoted a former Republican representative who bluntly summarized his party's plan for dealing with Trump. We're waiting for him to die.
Wow. I'm switching
I wasn't
parties.
being hyperbolic. That's their plan.
I mean, that's my plan. I've been waiting for that for forever. When do I get my turn?
You've been discussing for a long time whether or not he deserves a state funeral. I mean, I can vouch for the fact that you brought it up.
It's honestly, and we have to remind everybody now.
Whether flag should be at half staff.
I need to see. I think Donald Trump should be at half staff.
So McKay Coppins writes, as it turns out, this is not an uncommon sentiment. In my conversations with Republicans, I heard repeatedly that the least disruptive path to getting rid of Trump, grim as it sounds, might be to wait for his expiration.
Wow. Well, you had your chance. January 7th would have been an awesome opportunity.
Mr. Trump, apparently I looked on the back of that really long tie. There's an expiration date. There's a porn on date.
Yeah, Best Buy.
Best Buy before, November
1984, really, honestly. All right. Well, that's interesting. Do I have that article? Where is that one? I
don't know. I'll give it to you.
Yeah,
the rationale is straightforward.
I'm just going to read it over and over again.
Right. The former president is 76 years old, overweight, appears to maintain the diet of a college freshman, and believes that exercise is bad for you. So why not?
I know. Honest to God, where was it? How many times have I done this? I was rooting for cholesterol to save the election. Right. I have said, as difficult as it is, and I don't want to lay this at their feet, the doctors at Walter Reed just failed the trolley dilemma in October of 2020. They thought they were doing the right thing, trying to save their patient. But boy, it would have been a lot of problems would have been avoided if, as Republicans say, nature had taken its course.
Here, right?
God's will. Yeah.
Right. They why risk alienating your supporters when nature will take its course?
Right.
Peter Meyer, a former Republican representative who left office this month, termed this strategy actuarial arbitrage.
Wow, that's as good as alternative facts. That's really something. Well, I'm very I'm surprised to hear this, but well, for one thing, you could be able. You can point. A lot of you out there can point to this article and use it to get unbanned from, or get your posts put back up on Facebook and Twitter. Saying, I said the same thing a Republican office holder said. Why are you punishing me for it? But yes, good reminder. Everybody use the hashtag No State Funeral for Trump, and make sure that your friends and neighbors know so that they don't head for the fainting couch when the day finally does come.
Now, Meyer wants to clear this up. You have a lot of folks who are just wishing he was dead. I want to be clear. I'm not in that camp. I've heard from a lot of people.
I am that camp. I'm not in it.
Go on stage and put on the red hat.
Come on.
Give me a call the next day and say, I can't wait until he dies.
Well, I'd like to. That's terrific.
Good Lord.
Ding, ding, ding. That's really, the guy is widely hated. And, if you all got together and just said that, maybe things would come out differently.
Right,
I'm not saying
and
you
then
grant
there's
your
some
wish,
people who are just hoping the legal troubles, catch up with him. Mm-hmm. And then there's others who hope a coordinated donor revolt will make a difference.
Oh, baloney.
But none of those things are going to matter. Basically, they want him dead.
I can't blame them. It's it's a final. I don't know. It's the final solution to all this. Well, okay, that has to carry some connotation with it, but still, they're right. That's the easiest way out. And unfortunately, I guess if his father is any indication, he lived quite a long time. But I don't know why he would be any indication, really. I'm sure there's a genetic trait and all, but still, honestly, eating the way he eats. His father was, I think, a smaller fellow, at least in his old age. So
Terry
wow.
Sullivan, who ran Marco Rubio's
Exciting.
2016 presidential campaign, therefore is, as you would call him, a noted expert who should be hired by CNN.
Oh, definitely.
Told me that Trump's rivals failed to beat him that year in large part because they were always convinced his self-inflicted demise was imminent. There's an old quote attributed to Lee Atwater: "When your enemy's in the process of drowning, throw him a brick." I like the James Carville version: "When your enemy is drowning, throw him an anchor."
Yeah.
None of Donald
throw
Trump's
the brick
opponents
back.
ever have the balls to throw him the damn brick. They just hope somebody else will.
Yeah, right. Well, there's hit him in the head with the brick. That's another solution. And I thought there was a fly on there. Sorry. I thought you were Mike Pence. Whack. I don't know. That's startling. It's fun to hear. And I guess, they had the opportunity to sink him and to make him politically irrelevant. They should have impeached him, but that wasn't enough. They needed him to die, and that wasn't something they could do legislatively, I guess. So.
Right. So McKay talks
dead.
about how they like to delude themselves. I asked Rob Portman, he said, what should the party do about his Trump problem? And Portman said, well, Trump will probably look at the polling and then just decide there's no way he's going to win, and he'll gracefully bow out.
Sure.
I let out an involuntary laugh, writes McKay Compton. Well, maybe that's wishful thinking on my part. Portman conceded. That's how he ends the article.
Right. Well, as long as you're going to indulge in wishful thinking, wish for death. Honestly, go for it. That's a really astonishing.
Well, they don't
article.
wish for death; they hope for death.
Yes, I
Not
wish
the same thing. I don't want him to die. I just hope it happens.
Yeah, right. But okay, that's really rather astonishing. All right, let's talk about that article again all day tomorrow. Would you like to do that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Boy, I wish Trump would die, says some anonymous Republican. Now I have to do that to make sure that YouTube doesn't take my podcast. By the way, I think I mentioned on Mastodon the other day, just to keep you up to date on these. I forget which date they took down. I think it might have been the January 16th. Is that right? Or am I thinking? Anyway, this is like the third or fourth time that YouTube has taken down one of the podcasts. It's not a huge issue. I don't make any money from YouTube, and they won't monetize my videos or anything like that. So, it doesn't make any difference, like, financially. It's just, the record on YouTube is incomplete. Don't worry about it. You can always get any episode they decide to take down for whatever stupid reason is always still available on Libsyn, because Libsyn knows there's nothing wrong with the content of those podcasts. It's the YouTube automated algorithmic thing that digitizes. I guess they digitize every word, which is amazing. How much of my stupid dictation they would have digitized. And I wish they would make available as a service. Can they give me the transcript of every show? Because I think at one point somebody asked about turning on like closed captioning for the YouTube videos, and we might have gotten instructions on how to do it. And I've never sat through, and I don't think I've sat through one of my own shows on YouTube to see whether it's captioned or not, but that would be wise. But I guess they digitize every show, and then they scan the speech, and this has happened like 3 or 4 times, which is a very weird thing, just in general, that I'll read an article about a vaccine denialist or an election denialist making their stupid claims and then having them debunked. And, I don't typically just read the denialist propaganda for any reason. When I say typically, I guess I would venture to say never, but who knows? I can't remember everything that I did. But certainly not without reading it and saying, boy, isn't this stupid? Listen to how crazy these people are. Here's the things that they say. But even so, more often it's in the context of there's also another person who has organized their thoughts about how stupid this conspiracy theory person is. And I'll just read their thoughts about it and comment on it along the way. And the YouTube algorithm says he's reading content that is, conspiracy theory stuff, and we're going to ban him for that. And it's like, but it's a story about how dumb and wrong that is and debunking it. And like I said, they've done this 3 or 4 times. The first time they did it, I actually pointed out, listen again, you'll see what's going on. And they said, you know what, you're right. And they undid it. And then the second time they said, you want to appeal this? And I said, yeah, sure. Same reason as the first time. But this time they just didn't bother. And I said, no, we reviewed it and it's still bad. All right, whatever. So they said, do it again and you'll be in real trouble. This is a warning because you have no strikes against you. And then they did it a third time and they said, but you have no strikes against you. So this is a warning. And I didn't say it, but I was like, well, what about the last one that you foolishly made the same mistake that you did the first time, but didn't reverse yourself? So, now I should have 5 strikes against me or whatever, for whatever reason. There are none. They just keep doing the same mistake over and over again. So there's 3 or 4 episodes that they said, well, we're never going to put these back up again. But the other funny thing is those episodes are still available for the most part. And the latest one is, I think, currently still missing. But for some reason, they just end up reinstating these things anyway. So maybe they are eventually reviewing them, and just to save face, they're not bothering to tell me that I've won my appeal. I don't know. Anyway, YouTube is stupid and you should avoid it to the extent possible. For me, it's an automatic thing that I can push the button on Libsyn and they'll publish it there, and some people use it and it's sometimes convenient, and 9 times out of 10 they leave the posts alone. So that's the extent of my enthusiasm for YouTube as a product. The end. Anyway, wanted to bring you some other stories and bring you up to date on things. I feel like obligated to go back into Pocket and say, where do we leave off in reading something that was important yesterday that I wanted to share with you and finish up? Yeah, and I think we were reading the Timothy Snyder Substack article called The Spectre of 2016, his take on the McGonagall story. And I read about 3/4 of the way through that, I think. And then I saw lots of people discussing it and saying, everybody on social media, you should go and take a look at this fantastic piece about McGonagall. And I thought, good, I'm very glad that we started on this thing. Where did we leave off with this? Because there was a big finale that I really did want to share with you. And I think we got at least as far as I see the mention of Anne Applebaum, which I thought was an interesting pull to throw in there. Let's see. Then there was the Comey incident. And let's see. How far did we get? I want to jump back into this. Was this, had we done this already? Yeah, right. We were explaining counterintelligence and what it is. Maybe that's a good place to pick up on again, though. We have here, let's see. The Russian influence campaign was an issue for American counterintelligence. It is worth pausing to understand why, since it helps us see the centrality of McGonagall and the meaning of this scandal. I mean, it's as important a place as any to jump back in. Intelligence is about trying to understand, that is to say, trying to understand what's going on in the world, right, and whatever's happening with this thing or that thing. Intelligence is about trying to understand. Counterintelligence is about making that, the understanding, hard for those who are trying to understand it, right? So counterintelligence is about confounding the intelligence operations of other countries. Branching out from counterintelligence are the more exotic operations designed to make an enemy not only misunderstand the situation, but also act on the basis of these misunderstandings against the enemy's own interests. Such operations, which have been a Russian or Soviet specialty for more than a century, go under the name of provocation or active measures, right? We definitely read this part. Just trying to help people understand what it is that we're talking about when we talk about Russian active measures being taken in the United States. As you can see, counterintelligence is about foiling the intelligence operations, the other side's attempt to understand what's going on, but a subset of counterintelligence is essentially a counterintelligence. The active measures here are making it difficult for Americans to understand what it is the Russians were doing here in the country, and we still don't understand it. And so, in that sense, they've been very successful in all of this. And one of the other examples that he brought out was, if you, for instance, were one of the people who tend to think of the Russian invasion of Ukraine as stemming from the 2002 movement of tanks into eastern Ukraine and advancing on Kyiv, and forgetting entirely about the annexation of Crimea, then an active measure has done its work on you. The active measure being the campaign worldwide in 2014 and thereafter to wave your hands and make America forget that the Russians had done this thing. I'm so influenced by their active measures, and I'm thinking of myself as Russian. But we did, and I mean, everyone will recall, I think, from everybody listening to the show will recall, but there was American sanctions placed on Russia and Russian operations even before the 2016 election in retaliation for the annexation of Crimea. And that's all true, but again, in America, we had our focus elsewhere. In Ukraine, obviously, it never left their consciousness. I suppose there's no fooling the Ukrainians into believing that invasion didn't take place in 2014. But for the rest of us, it's just one of the things that we forgot along the way. Let's see. We can skip down a little bit more, and maybe we rejoin it here. Maybe this transition is helpful after all. As I skim back, I'm like, no, we should definitely use that. We should definitely continue to remind people of that one. Now, I think we'll have to skip forward and try and find the place where we left off. And I wish there was a way of physically marking that here inside the article, but apparently there's not. So I think we jumped off right about here, this breaking point, and I'll just recap the one more paragraph before I think that we made our stop. All of these pieces of recent history, that is, all of the things that we've learned about now, in hindsight, after the McGonigal story broke, that is, the weird decision by Comey to make the announcement about reopening the Hillary Clinton investigation days before the election, came as an attempt to head off the possibility that someone from the New York FBI office would leak the story. And in order to get out ahead of it and gain control of it, Comey felt like he had to make that announcement. Now that we are informed that a central figure in the New York FBI office was willing to take money from foreign actors while on the job, this line of analysis bears some reconsideration. Objectively, FBI New York was acting in concert with Russia, ignoring or defining narrowly Russia's actions, and helping deliver the 1-2 punch to Clinton in October that very likely saved Trump. When people act in the interest of a foreign power, it is sometimes for money. I do recall reading this yesterday. It is sometimes because the foreign power knows something about them, compromat, right? It is sometimes for ideals. I actually agree with the Russians, and back in the old Soviet days, I'm a communist sympathizer and I want to help them in their international campaign for socialism, whatever it is. And it is sometimes for no conscious motive at all. And here we're talking about the active measures working on somebody, right? What one thinks of as one's own motives have, in fact, I would add, been curated, manipulated, and directed. It seems quite possible, I raise this as a hypothesis that reasonable people would consider, that some mixture of these factors was at work in the FBI New York in 2016. Why would people be trying to do this to Hillary Clinton, trying to help Donald Trump win? It could be any number of things, and these are all good, likely candidates. Could be for money, could be because somebody has something over them, so they force them to do it in order to keep it hidden. It could be because I truly believe that Putin is, or Trump is awesome and should be the one in office. Or it could be I think I'm acting in the interest of the United States, but in fact I've been fooled, manipulated. Not the same stuff happening, I guess, to manipulate the FBI as might be happening to manipulate voters in general. But I guess here, you're reminded that there are a lot of people who got their news chiefly from Facebook or something like that, were in fact getting either the original fake news before Donald Trump co-opted the phrase. And now I think about the way that he did that, and we've discussed that in the past, that originally the idea, the phrase fake news was made to describe what the, wasn't it like Macedonian teenage hacker types were doing back in 2016, putting together what looked like news sites that was basically either aggregating the worst stories about Hillary Clinton, but also supplementing them with garbage that they were totally making up, and just putting it out there and calling it news.us or whatever. And people were like, oh, it's the news from the United States, so I'll just get my news there. And it would say things like, it would do the Pizzagate type stories. It would just make up garbage. Or Hillary Clinton is ill. She's about to die. Remember all of that stuff? And that was all coming out of these fake news sites that were just putting together garbage reports that looked like news, but there were clickbait. And they might have just been doing it purely for the money to harvest the clicks, etc. But they may also have been, being paid off by who knows who to whether it could have been the Trump campaign directly or indirectly, for that matter, could have just been Russians picking up the tab on Trump's behalf. We really never delved into that, never had a thorough investigation of how that was going. But Trump heard the accusation, and it was probably right, and did his usual thing. Said, no, this is actually proof that it's happening against me by the New York Times and others, not these fly-by-night Macedonian and who knows where else, Romanian, Bulgarian sites that, that I or my allies are in fact paying for. But rather, it's really the New York Times doing it in the opposite way. All the news that's actually true is fake. And he just said it a lot, and it people, became an applause line. And nobody ever, reclaimed the terminology. And I don't even know exactly how you would go about doing that. But it occurs to me it's very similar to what is going on right now with the McGonigal case, right? The McGonigal case is breaking, and everybody's realizing, oh my God, the worst nightmare, the head of counterintelligence at the FBI's New York office, where most of the counterintelligence work goes on, was corrupt. And so corrupt he was just directly on the take from Eastern Bloc or oligarchs right while he was on the job, and even, and then of course immediately afterwards showed up to work directly for Oleg Deripaska. That's a very damning piece of information for Trump. But what's Trump doing with it? Same thing he did with the fake news phrasing. He's out there saying the exact opposite of what we are now learning is true, was true. I told you that the FBI was corrupt. They investigated me, and I said, you're corrupt because you're investigating me, and you all thought I was crazy. But as it turns out, I was right. They're very corrupt, and now you have evidence of the corruption. But the corruption was that they were not doing what they were supposed to be doing to catch you, who was committing a crime. But never mind all that. Just like with the fake news thing, he's just saying this means the opposite of what they're saying it means, and it proves that I'm right. It really, really doesn't. Anyway, where do we leave off with this? So yes, right. So sometimes he's trying to figure out, what would have motivated the FBI New York office to do this sort of thing. And it may be just that, you're being manipulated. I was going to say something more about the number of people who got their news from Facebook and, it was either the fake news stuff or, on a parallel track where, for instance, coming across the Facebook groups of fake Black Lives Matter look-alike groups that were created by the Russian troll factories, but were in fact, doing the opposite work and trying to, in some cases, they were outright racist type organizations, fake organizations, but hoping to rope in real American racists. And at the same time, they were also, and they wanted to organize them in a real world space and hold a rally somewhere. And at the same time, they would be working as a fake parallel, Black Lives Matter type organization, but not using that name exactly, but organizing what they hoped would be, Black Americans sympathetic, in fact, to the Black Lives Matter movement and organize a real-world rally for them as well and put them in the same physical space as the one that they had arranged for the racists in the hope that there would be a riot and a fight that would break out and cause chaos in the United States and make us look like idiots. We're perfectly content to look like idiots all by ourselves, but the Russians thought it might be fun and helpful for them to try and spur that on. Those are the sorts of active measures, and so those people would have said, I wasn't manipulated by Russians to go to this rally and fight white supremacists. I support the Black Lives Matter movement, genuinely. And it was my idea to go to this thing. And I didn't know racists were going to show up, but I had a feeling that they might because it's the sort of dumb thing that they would do in America. And if they do, and they showed up and they start a fight with me, we'll get in a fight. But I didn't think it was anybody else's idea. But then it was like, well, why did you go to this rally? Oh, I support this cause. But why was there a rally at all? That I don't know. But there was one and I decided to attend. Well, what if I told you that A, Russians organized that rally, and B, they also organized the rally of the white supremacists next to you, and they did that on purpose? Wow, I would be really surprised by that because, I felt like it was my own decision to go, and it was your own decision to go. You didn't know that all the rest of this stuff was being arranged necessarily, and you might have chosen differently if you had known. But you were manipulated into doing it. You thought that there was a legit rally going on. That's because there was an active measure. It doesn't mean you're stupid that you fell prey to this active measure. It just means that it was well designed. How come it was always so well designed? Well, one of the reasons was, one, it doesn't take a great deal of intellect to understand the basics of American politics if you're willing to put the time in on it and you're willing to watch it. And we are, because we live here, but there's lots of people around the world who are likewise fascinated by American politics and will watch it. It doesn't take any particular expertise, but if you also, let's say, are getting detailed polling and messaging information from the Trump campaign, thanks to the fact that the campaign manager running the Trump campaign is working there free of charge, by the way, in an effort to work off a debt to Oleg Deripaska and providing him with the sort of information that he could pass on to Russian intelligence and the Russian intelligence could pass on to the internet troll factories and say, you know what? here's some feedback on your active measures, and here's some more information that might make your active measures feel more genuine and be more effective. Where can you target these active measures? What sorts of messaging should you use? What works best in what states? And what states are the most important to flood with this sort of information and active measures, and disinformation, I should say, and active measures, in order to, let's say, by the skin of your teeth, flip the electoral college outcome such that somebody who lost by several million votes could still be declared the president? Then you would have something. And guess what? That's what was actually going on, as it turns out. Wow, how strange. All of these pieces of recent history must hang together in one way or another, and the fresh and shocking revelation of McGonigal's arrest is a chance for us to see how. Returning to the Snyder piece, again, if these allegations are true, they will soon be surrounded by other heretofore unknown facts, which should lead us to consider the problem of election integrity in a general way. As of right now, the circumstantial evidence suggests that we consider the possibility that the FBI's reporting work in 2016, which resulted in a framing of the issue which was convenient for Trump and Russia, i.e., the New York Times story, no connection between Trump and Russia, well, that might have had something to do with the fact, per the indictments, that one of its lead agents was willing to take money from foreign actors while on the job. In connection with the leaks from FBI New York, late in the 2016 campaign, which had the obvious effect of harming Clinton and helping Trump, McGonigal's arrest also demands a broader rethink of the scale of the 2016 disaster. How much was FBI New York, wittingly and unwittingly, caught up in a Russian active measure? The charges have not been proven. They were just made, of course. If they are, it would be a bit surprising if the two offenses with which McGonigal is now charged were isolated events. There is a certain danger, apparently, in seeing them this way and letting bygones be bygones. A U.S. attorney presenting the case said that McGonigal, quote, should have known better. Remember, we laughed out loud when we saw that line the other day. Should have known better. This is the kind of thing one says when a child gets a bellyache after eating too much cotton candy at the county fair. It hardly seems to correspond to the gravity of the situation. So don't just laugh and move on. He's absolutely right. Failing to understand the Russian threat in the 2010s, i.e., when a few years later, for instance, the annexation of Crimea and the international effort by the Russians to portray it as just something else. That active measure worked on Donald Trump. He was willing to say, no, Crimea, it's mostly Russians ethnically, and they want to be annexed. They wanted to be annexed. So it's not a crime, and you should go ahead and do it. In fact, you could do it with the rest of Ukraine because they're corrupt and they're full of Nazis and criminals and da-da-da. He was totally sold on the anti-Ukrainian message well before we even understood generally that there was an anti-Ukrainian message coming from the Russians. It took us years as a general population to understand even anything close to that. But then even right up to the date when in 2016, the Ukrainian prime minister comes to the United States to tell Republican leaders face to face what's going on. Oh my goodness, it's diabolical, right? It's maniacal. But let's not do anything about it because it still inures to our benefit. Failing to understand the Russian threat in the 2010s and up to 2016 was a prelude to failing to understand the Russian threat in the 2020s when they actually did just outright invade, and we were willing to acknowledge that. And today's Americans who support Russia in its war of atrocity tend to be members of the Trump family or people closely aligned with Trump, such as Giuliani. The people who helped Trump then take part in the war on Ukraine, the people who helped Trump then, I should say, take part in the war on Ukraine now. That's the dividing line. Consider one of the main architects of Russia's 2016 campaign to support Trump, Yevgeny Prigozhin. In 2016, his relevant position was as the head of the Internet Research Agency, the Russian troll farm, right? They were the very people who, for example, helped spread the story about Clinton that rescued Trump from the Access Hollywood scandal. Without the Internet Research Agency covering his back, Trump would have had a much harder time in the 2016 election. Today, during the war in Ukraine, Prigozhin is now better known as the owner of something else. The troll farm isn't that big of a deal anymore. He's the owner of Wagner, the mercenary corps, sending tens of thousands of Russian prisoners to kill and die in Ukraine. Of course, the implications of the arrest go further, as you might have imagined, but we have our 1-minute break coming up here. So we'll set it up as best we can over the music and then take our break and give you the rest of the cliffhanger. The implications of the arrest go farther. McGonigal had authority in sensitive investigations where the specific concern was that there was an American giving away other Americans to foreign governments. Oh, so turning in our spies and compromising our sources and methods abroad and possibly getting people killed, he had authority over that information too? Bad news.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, where I miscalculated just in saying for some reason that we were having our 1-minute break when we were in fact heading into our 2-minute break, our last of the show, but it didn't matter because I had said it. I had already set up to press the button on the 1-minute break recording. And so I did the best I could to try and save myself a little bit of engineering difficulty later on. But okay, time to reset. And let's finish up this Timothy Snyder piece. We're only finally nearing the end here. I know I keep breaking off to add more commentary, but that's the way it goes on this show. But as we had set up before the break, the implications of McGonigal's arrest go further because he had authority, as it says here, in sensitive investigations where the specific concern was essentially that he was giving away, someone in America was giving away Americans to foreign governments, I guess, revealing our operatives and operations. And it wasn't just Jared Kushner, apparently, who was doing it. Untangling what that means will require a concern for the United States that goes beyond party loyalty. Unfortunately, some key political figures seem to be reacting to the news in the opposite spirit, suppressing the past, thereby destabilizing the future. Immediately after the McGonigal story broke, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy ejected Adam Schiff from the House Intelligence Committee in a grand exhibition of indifference to national security. A veteran of that committee, Schiff had taken the time to learn about Russia. It is grotesque to exclude him at this particular moment in the middle of a war and at the beginning of a spy scandal. Probably true, and I wonder whether McGonigal would consider it having his back to eject Adam Schiff from the Intelligence Committee. And by the way, How, in case you were wondering just procedurally, how is it that that was done without a House floor vote, like they're saying that they would need to do for Ilhan Omar and removing her from the House Foreign Affairs Committee? And the answer is because it is a select committee, the Intelligence Panel Permanent Select Committee. It's permanent, but it is a select committee. The membership of a select committee is subject directly to decisions made by the Speaker of the House. In most cases, it will be the minority conference or caucus that would submit a list to the Speaker and say, these are the members from the minority party that we intend to seat or to see seated on that panel. But technically, it is within the discretion of the Speaker to say yes or no to it. And, well, there you go. That's how the formulation of the makeup of the January 6th committee ended up in the Speaker's hands. Now, of course, Speaker being McCarthy and not Pelosi, he's able to exercise that power unilaterally, whereas in the case of Ilhan Omar, the list submitted by the Democrats of who they want from their party to fill the slots allotted to them on the regular standing committees is a matter that has to be settled by a vote of the full House at some point, a resolution adopting the membership of the committee, and or if they've already adopted the makeup of the committee and they want to eject her from it, it would likewise require a House floor vote. Just wanted to clear that up for if my babble about it can be described as clearing things up. But at any rate, that wasn't the point that Snyder was trying to make here. It was just that it's maybe totally unrelated to the McGonigal case, but it doesn't help us approach understanding the damage of the McGonigal case to take one of the most experienced hands in the Intelligence Committee in the House and boot them off for partisan reasons, or for any reason, for that matter. By the way, also sitting in pocket are a number of analyses of that move and that it might be particularly damaging in the long run for Republicans, as it probably, at the time the articles were written, it was still speculation that it would probably motivate Schiff to run for Senate in California and look with an eye towards replacing Dianne Feinstein there, whose effectiveness has been called into question numerous times, but who has always been a big voice on the Senate Intelligence Committee. In other words, that he just moves chambers and moves into the other Intelligence Committee instead of waiting around in the House or seeing his, ability to serve in the House on intelligence matters curtailed by the Speaker. Well, I'll just go where they aren't, over there. Now, that's not to say it's a cakewalk for him, and he's not the only candidate for the job. And of course, even if he makes it through the primary, there's still the general election. But in California, it's a pretty good bet that they'll be able to return a Democrat to the Senate to replace Feinstein. But it will take some time. In the meantime, he's out of that action. Anyway, McCarthy's recent move against Schiff also recalls 2016, sadly, says Tim Snyder. Much as I did, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy had much as I did, Kevin McCarthy had an inkling back then, 2016, that something was wrong with Trump and Russia. You know, the famous quotation that he's going to go with here. He expressed his view that June that Donald Trump was the Republican most likely to be taking money from Vladimir Putin. He actually said he was pretty sure it was actually happening. Swear to God, as he put it. This showed a fine political instinct, sadly unmatched by any ethical follow-through. McCarthy did not share his suspicion with his constituents, nor do anything to follow through. He made the remark in a conversation with other Republican House members who did not disagree with him and who apparently came to the conclusion that the risk of an embarrassment to their party was more important than the risk to American national security. The Republicans in the Senate, sadly, took a similar view. They deliberately marginalized a CIA investigation that did address the Russian influence campaign for Trump. In September of 2016, Mitch McConnell made it clear to the Obama administration that the CIA's findings would be treated as political if they were discussed in public. The Obama administration, sadly, bowed to this pressure. The Republican operation to get Trump elected in 2016 was real. We are still living under the specter of 2016, and we are closer to the beginning of the process of learning about it than we are to the end. Denying that it happened or acting as though it did not happen makes the United States vulnerable to Russian influence operations that are still ongoing, sometimes organized by the same people. It is easy to forget about 2016, and humans want to do so. It is human to want to do so. But democracy is about learning from mistakes, and this arrest makes it very clear we still have much to learn. All right, we finally reached the end of the Tim Snyder piece here, but I think it's important to have as background. And I mentioned a couple of things, that there are items way back here in Pocket about. One was the Adam Schiff thing about him possibly running for Senate, but I can't recall. Now I should have made a note to myself. What were the other things? And probably no way of my actually recalling them out of hand, unless it was about well, I don't know. Maybe the thing to do is to scroll back a little ways in Pocket and start catching up in that chronological order instead of my usual reverse chronological order. But let's see. This would be, I think, probably around this point, I would guess, at which we really jumped off of the, we jumped into the COVID timeline instead of the staying up with the news timeline. Here, let's see. There's, here's the initial reports on McGonigal, and I guess some other things. Maybe that we can just jump in around here. There are, I guess we'll throw this item in here that's seemingly unrelated, but obviously has some kind of a tie to things, but something we missed entirely in our absence. A New York Times story, this one dated January 22nd. Edward Wong, Julian Barnes, and Eric Schmidt reporting under the headline, Russian agents, you'll see the connection there, Russian agents suspected of directing far-right group to mail bombs in Spain, because this is an international effort, active measures happening everywhere. Here's a great example of active measures, right? I'm sure that the far-right group in Spain probably thought either that this was their own great idea, or even if they acknowledged that it had been suggested to them from the outside, still said, this is something we would like to do. It's not necessarily because they have any information about us that we're afraid of their revealing. So a good active measure example, but not a good example of things to do, just a good example of bad things to do when Russians push you to do it. U.S. officials say the operation may be a signal by Russia that the country and its proxies could carry out more terrorist actions in Europe if nations continue supporting Ukraine. Interesting. And of course, I don't know why they would limit it to Europe, but American and European officials believe that Russian military intelligence officers directed associates of a white supremacist militant group based in Russia to carry out a recent letter bomb campaign in Spain, whose most prominent targets were the prime minister, the defense minister, and foreign diplomats, according to U.S. officials. Okay, that's interesting. So it may be, I guess it's a twist on what I thought was happening, that it isn't a native far-right group in Spain that's doing it, but a native far-right group in Russia targeting Spain. That's interesting, too. Spanish and foreign investigators have been looking into who sent 6 letter bombs in late November and early December to sites mostly in Madrid, including the official residence of Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, which also serves as his office, the American and Ukrainian embassies, and there's an American embassy targeting, right, and the Defense Ministry. No one was killed in the attacks, which U.S. officials consider terrorism. An employee of the Ukrainian embassy was injured when one of the packages exploded. I don't see how you fail to view it as terrorism, but of course, maybe they were seeking to avoid doing that because otherwise, I don't know how you escape the conclusion that you're going to have to declare the Russian government a state sponsor of terrorism. And that's got diplomatic implications all over it. Of course, investigators in recent weeks have focused on the Russian Imperial Movement, a radical group that has members and associates across Europe and military-style training centers in St. Petersburg, Russia, the officials said. They added that the group, which has been designated a global terrorist organization by the U.S. State Department, is believed to have ties to Russian intelligence agencies, which I guess explains why, you might think, oh, well, but, certainly as the Russians continue to consider themselves having a legitimate government and being part of the legitimate community of nations, they couldn't just simply be excusing terrorist training camps right in the middle of St. Petersburg because the world community wouldn't stand for that. But what if you have instead an outlaw mob-style oligarchy running Russia rather than a legitimate government? Well, then I guess you could tolerate such a thing. But you can't make that call because it's a nuclear power. And we've never really dealt with a nuclear-enabled mafia-style organization before. And we're not entirely sure what to do about it. Well, anyway, these officials added that the group, which has been, I read this already. They have been designated a global terrorist organization, but I don't know how well the rest of the world is doing in saying, and it's state-sponsored, and we need to acknowledge that. Well, anyway, important members of the group have been in Spain, and the police have tracked its ties with far-right Spanish organizations. So there is some coordination going on here. See if this story clears up any. U.S. officials say that the Russian officers who directed the campaign appeared intent on keeping European governments off guard and maybe testing out proxy groups in the event Moscow decides to escalate a conflict. The apparent aim of the action was to signal that Russia and its proxies could carry out terrorist strikes across Europe, including in the capitals of member states of NATO, which is helping defend Ukraine against Russia's invasion, said the U.S. officials, who spoke on condition of anonymity because of the usual reasons. Spain is a member of the alliance and has given military and humanitarian aid to Ukraine as well as diplomatic support. One of the letter bombs was sent to Instalasa. That's my best guess at the pronunciation here. A weapons maker in Zaragoza, northeastern Spain, that manufactures grenade launchers that Spain is giving to Ukraine. And another went to the Torrejón de Ardoz air base outside Madrid. There are no signs that Moscow is ready to engage in widespread covert attacks or sabotage in Europe, because why would you give those signs? That's what a covert attack is all about, which Russian officials believe could provoke a response from NATO and potentially a costly, wider conflict, according to U.S. and allied officials. For that same reason, President Vladimir Putin of Russia and his generals have not ordered a conventional attack on a NATO country. Mr. Putin's calculus on terrorist attacks could change if Russia continues to suffer major setbacks in Ukraine, officials in the U.S. say. Putin has given his military intelligence agency wide latitude to develop and conduct covert operations in Europe, but the degree to which the Kremlin was involved in the letter bomb operation is unclear, they say. And that, of course, is by design. They basically want the benefit of the fright factor and the actual killing, to the extent that they're able to do it, of terrorist attacks, but the confusion that goes along with it as well. You can't prove that we did it, or we don't claim responsibility for it. The people who did it may have been Russian. You might even be able to prove that they have a relationship with Vladimir Putin himself, the people who financed this stuff. But as long as there's murkiness, we're pretty sure that rules-based NATO involved democracies are not going to simply say, well, I don't know, all the cloudiness seems to be, it's so murky, it's probably right, let's just go for it and have a war. They're going to need, actual evidence, and it's going to have to be clear. And then even then, they'll say, but, doing something about it is an outright, straight up declaration of war by, presumably, NATO as an alliance against the Russians. And you know what that means. That means the nuclear operations portfolios come out of the drawer, and we have to start thinking about it being World War III. Is it better to simply suffer the indignity of repeated and obvious and targeted terrorist attacks and do nothing? Can we afford that? But if the alternative is, in fact, World War III, who's to say what the balance of accounts is here in terms of who can afford what? It's kind of, evil genius. Well, anyway, so the degree to which the Kremlin was involved in the letter bomb operation is obviously going to be unclear and stay that way. This seems like a warning shot, said Nathan Sales, the State Department's counterterrorism coordinator in the Trump administration, when the Russian imperial movement was designated a terrorist organization. That's amazing that they even went ahead and did that. I wonder whether Putin may never even have tried to talk Trump out of that. No, go ahead and do it. It's actually quite confounding and annoying to you. And besides, if you intervene, it'll be way too obvious that you're in my pocket. I don't really care if you designate the Russian imperial movement a terrorist organization. We'll just deny that we have anything to do with them to the extent that that gets in our way. Yeah. So anyway, this is Nathan Sales continuing here. It's Russia sending a signal that it's prepared to use terrorist proxies to attack in the West's rear areas. The Russian officers behind the bombing campaign work for the Main Directorate, commonly referred to as the GRU, one of Moscow's more aggressive intelligence shops, U.S. officials say. In recent years, the group has carried out bold and lethal covert actions with impunity. And I guess they're hoping for more impunity here. Members of the agency have been involved in a range of shadowy activities, from interfering in the 2016 U.S. presidential election, for instance, to shooting down a Malaysian civilian airliner over Ukraine in 2014, according to U.S. officials. And don't we all remember that one? And if you do, then how could you be of the mind that the Russian invasion of Ukraine didn't start until 2022? Those regions of eastern Ukraine were occupied, and occupied enough to have missile batteries placed in them that they were used to shoot down civilian airliners in 2014. One specific part of the agency, Unit 29155, that's what it's called, has tried to destabilize Europe through attempted coups and assassinations, according to U.S. and European security officials, and no doubt according to the then Prime Minister of Ukraine, who in 2016 came to meet face-to-face with what he thought was the leadership of the United States government, but was in fact the leadership of the Republican Party, and so they didn't do anything with the information. Its agents include Russian war veterans, and what was so secretive that most GRU operatives probably did not know it existed. American and allied officials learned about the unit only in recent years. U.S. officials suspect that the Russian officers involved in the Spain action are part of the 161st Special Purpose Specialist Training Center, whose headquarters in eastern Moscow house Unit 29155, among other groups, U.S. officials say. Spanish investigators have identified persons of interest they believe were involved in the attack, one senior U.S. official said. A spokeswoman for the Spanish embassy in Washington declined to comment, citing a continuing inquiry. Fiona Hill, everyone remembers her, right? A senior director for Europe and Russia on the White House National Security Council in the Trump administration, and who famously testified against Donald Trump in his first impeachment hearings, said it would not be surprising if the GRU had directed the Russian imperial movement to carry out the attacks. Most of these kinds of organizations are, of course, linked to Russian intelligence, either the GRU or the FSB, she said, referring also to the Federal Security Service, Russia's domestic intelligence agency. Oftentimes, they're just front groups for the intelligence activities. Intelligence agents use the groups to sow confusion and create implausible, it says implausible, deniability, she said. But I think that they mean plausible deniability, which is usually how that phrase goes. I wonder if she very intentionally calls it implausible deniability. Donald Trump is all about implausible deniability. We haven't even gotten to the myriad ongoing court cases that he's involved in, which have been in the news that I really want to share with you over the balance of the week, including apparently some proceedings where for instance, a continuation of the New York Attorney General civil case against the Trump Organization, in which he and his attorneys are appearing in court denying that there even is such a thing as the Trump Organization. That, I guess, is what I would include under the banner of implausible deniability. But anyway, back to the international affair here. American and British intelligence officials have been working with the Spanish National Police and counterintelligence officials on the investigation. There are suspicions about the Russian imperial movement and the GRU coalesced late last year, soon after the bombs were discovered, U.S. officials say. The radical group is only partially aligned with the Russian government. The movement's leadership has criticized the incompetence of Russian leadership in the Ukraine war. They probably say, well, let's go nuke the place. And accused Mr. Putin of corruption. How interesting is that? Why would he tolerate such a thing? Again, there for plausible deniability. How can you suspect that I'm directing their activities when they're against me? Well, is it possible that you directed them to pretend they were against you? No. That's basically where we are with that. Yet, because the group shares Moscow's aims of undermining Western governments and sowing chaos in Europe, Russian intelligence has been able to influence its operations, according to American officials, or just actually be their operations. And they're just using as cover the convenient story that, oh, no, we're not acting on Putin's behalf. We hate Putin. We just happen to have exactly the same aims as him. The ability to use the Russian imperial movement as a sometimes proxy force is useful to Russian intelligence, particularly because that makes it more difficult for rival countries to attribute actions to the Russian government. The State Department designated the group and its leadership global terrorists in April 2020, the first time such a label had been applied to a white supremacist group. That's interesting. We've been trying to get them to do that domestically for years. They won't do it, but they will do it in connection with Russian organizations. And by the way, I mean, if you're just thinking about the plausibility of these groups and how do they even exist, and yes, they're the government, no, they're not the government, yes, they're anti-Putin, no, they're not anti-Putin, it's all a ruse. How can you even imagine such things? I guess think back to the stories we were reading about the Russians who own properties in Trump buildings in Florida. What was it? Southern Shores? I don't remember what they call the place. But they're the group of 7 buildings that all of the condos in these units are owned by Russian folks of various stripes, including suspected mobsters, oligarchs, etc. But there was this. Remember that there was a semi-legal motorcycle gang, even where the leadership owned condos in these Florida buildings, etc. I mean, if you're just talking about how is there even space for this sort of operation to happen inside Russia? I mean, we've been hearing about that for several years already. No mention of the motorcycle gangs here. But anyway, RIM, the Russian Imperial Movement, has provided paramilitary-style training to white supremacists and neo-Nazis in Europe and actively works to rally these types of groups into a common front against their perceived enemies, the State Department, said in the announcement of the designation. The department said the group had 2 training centers in St. Petersburg that are, quote, likely being used for woodland and urban assault, tactical weapons, and hand-to-hand combat training. The leaders designated by the State Department were Stanislav, oh boy, goodness, I'm going to skip the middle name here, Stanislav Vorobyev, who founded the group in St. Petersburg in 2002, Denis Garyev, the leader of its paramilitary arm, the Russian Imperial Legion, they separate that, huh? And Nikolai, oh boy, goodness, Trushchalov, an organizer for the group's activities abroad. The department said that 2 Swedes who committed a series of bombings in Gothenburg, Sweden in 2016, I missed that one, had attended a training course run by the Russian group. The perpetrators, who were convicted in court, had targeted a refugee shelter, a shelter for asylum seekers, and a cafe. So you get the sense of who these people are and what they're trying to organize, and we haven't heard much about it at all. The Center for International Security and Cooperation at Stanford University describes the Russian imperial movement as white supremacist, monarchist, ultranationalist, pro-Russian Orthodox, and anti-Semitic as well, just for good measure, of course. The group advocates the restoration of Tsarist rule in Russia, or at least that's what they say, and nurtures ties with neo-Nazi and white supremacist groups in the United States and Europe. American and European security officials have had growing concerns about the white supremacist groups with transnational links for most of the last decade. In 2019, for example, an Australian man who killed 51 people at 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, published a manifesto online, you remember that, before the massacre, saying he had drawn inspiration from the white extremist terrorism attacks in Europe and the United States. As a result of the recent letter bombs, U.S. intelligence and counterterrorism officials have increased their scrutiny of the Russian imperial movement, including updating terrorist watch lists to flag suspected leaders of its group or its members, the U.S. officials said. Russian intelligence agents have attracted more attention from counterintelligence officials and police departments in recent years as they have carried out increasingly bold operations, particularly in Europe. You'll remember, of course, Sergei Skripal and his daughter being poisoned outright, right out in the open inside the UK. All of these things, and harken back now, if you will, to the decision by American Republicans to protest the idea that American white supremacists be so designated, right?
You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
And you'll recall that the Obama administration backed down on that designation and withdrew that FBI report at some point, and it has come back to haunt us. In fact, right now, as they investigate what went wrong on January 6th, the suspicion is, well, maybe the police were misguided in their belief that the American left was equally dangerous. Stay tuned.